here. Let's bring in the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who did the original negotiation with the Taliban. So would you have left 300 men behind? Was that part of the plan?
Brian, good morning. Our plan always included an orderly, conditions-based withdrawal. It would have certainly included making sure we got the sequencing right, the sequencing on Bagram, the sequencing on civilians versus military, and of course it included the central thesis that we were going to make sure we got every American out. And also President Trump wanted to make sure that we didn't leave $80 billion in equipment behind as well. We were determined to get all the Americans out to make sure we got our equipment, that we were never threatened by our own equipment again. It's a sad day. We're now probably 24 hours from having everyone out of there, and we'll have a lot of Americans that are still stuck in Afghanistan.
What did they teach you? Did they teach you that at West Point, Mr. Secretary? You were #1 at West Point. Did you ever think that you'd be in America when we leave people behind in a war zone?
No, this is pretty straightforward, Brian. This is freshman year military 101. The military stays, it does its work, it gets the Americans out, and then and only then does it do the mission that protects itself and gets on its way.
Well, if this is true, if this is the last flight taking off, we still have 40 more hours until that deadline expires. Why would he do this?
You know, I can't account for that. I don't know if indeed it will be the final flight. I'm sure we still have military on the ground that we're going to have to get out as well. I hope there is a plan for after August 31st. I've not seen any evidence of that, but I hope there is. Countries to the north, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Central Asian countries, I am confident would be willing to help us get the Americans out of there. I hope we've been working that. I hope we're permitting non-governmental organizations that want to transfer Americans out, who are on the ground there today. You've all seen these stories, who are there. They've contacted me too, who have seen these. We've seen these stories. I hope that they have coordinated with these nations that surround Afghanistan in a way that even after we've left, there's an opportunity for these Americans to get home to their families.
Absolutely. Mr. Pompeo, I'm sure you were watching the president on Thursday, late in the day, when he went into the East Room and made the statement regarding the 13 brave Americans who died last week. Afterwards, he was asked by our White House correspondent. He reminded him, hey, Mr. President, you said the buck stops with you. Do you take responsibility for what has happened over the last 2 weeks? And the president said, yeah, I take responsibility, but at the same time, I blame the Trump administration. When you were at home at the Pompeo house, what did you yell at the television?
Steve, I'm kind of past the yelling phase of this. We know full well the plan that our administration had. We executed it with enormous success for an awfully long time. We negotiated with the Afghan government. We negotiated with the Hazaras. We were talking to every Afghan. We delivered the last year of our administration with not a single American killed, not a single American even attacked by the Taliban. We had a plan. It was conditions-based. We didn't get the last soldiers out of there. We still had work to do. We still had to get the conditions right. President Biden came in, made the decision to sequence the evacuation in the way that he did, and you can see the tragedy that has ensued.
So,
I watched the video yesterday from Dover Air Force Base. I've been out there. It's a solemn day. I'm praying for the family members of those 13, and I'm praying for the remaining Americans who are still stuck in Afghanistan, that we don't have more of those tragedies.
Sure. So you're saying that there was a plan in place, and essentially the Biden administration came in and ripped it up?
Well, we were very clear. President Trump wanted everyone out. We were working on this for 4 years, Steve. You know this. You just need only read the Twitter account. We desperately wanted to get these folks home. It was the right thing to do. I think that's the right decision. But we also knew that we had missions, including to make sure that we were never attacked from this place again. And so we were working to achieve both of those aims. So we went, Steve, from 15,000 to about 8,600. We paused. We went down to, I think it was a little over 4,000, 4,500. We took a final step to get down under 3,000, but that was each time based on the conditions on the ground. We wanted to get everyone out. President Trump wanted to, but we were never able to achieve the conditions that could deliver on the important American national security interests, which included making sure that we had our people home and our equipment out.
So it's pretty clear now, and the Washington Post writes it, and they hardly wake up every day thinking, how do I hurt Joe Biden? They talked about what happened Friday afternoon as Kabul fell. The Secretary of State needed to go to the Hamptons, even though Mazar-e Sharif had fallen without a fight, and that was looked to be a place in which Afghanistan was going to, the government was going to make a stand. And then a guy, Barador, who you guys got out of prison, made a contact to the administration and said, what do you want us to do? Do you want to take Kabul, or do you want us to, because the ministries are being torn apart and we're going to go in? And General McKenzie said, we will hold on to the airport. You can have the city. If that was presented to you or the president, what would you have said?
We would have said we're going to do everything we have to do. We would have said, we got this. You stay out of our way. We never begged. We never apologized. We always demonstrated power. We told the Taliban that if you don't behave the way that we want you to behave, we're going to impose real costs. Look, I've seen that reporting too, that it doesn't make much sense to me unless there was a truly political mission, that they had told these military folks, you know, you've got to get out, the time is running, the clock is near, do whatever you got to do, get this force down. That sounds like what was in their minds. That would not have been in President Trump's mind. We would not have been focused on that. We would have been focused on achieving the objective, getting our people home, getting Afghanistan to the conditions that were right before we did that, and making sure that every American had a chance to get home.
The current administration is saying we have significant leverage. We heard that in that soundbite. They expect the Taliban will allow safe passage for Americans to get out of Afghanistan if they want to. But we interviewed Brett Odom, a former Navy pilot and a combat veteran, and Pete Hegseth, who obviously served over in Afghanistan too, had a hand in getting his interpreter's brother out of Afghanistan safely. And they describe a different picture. Listen to this.
A family of 4 that were outside the gate. We were networking furiously. Every channel that we knew, there's Americans who are being left behind.
It's a tale of two Americas. You've got the administration, the State Department, Defense Department saying we're going to get all American citizens out. Yet we know there are hundreds. Yet we see this video. Yet we've got them pounding on the gate on the very last day. And we know at the highest level people are being notified. And at this point, it is fend for yourself. Even a family from Texas with passports with kids at the gate.
Mr. Secretary, what does the future look like for those Americans who want to get out and they're going to be trapped there?
Ainsley, I think it's going to be tough. I've heard folks talk about leverage after our departure. It's our presence that provided the leverage, that when we're gone, that leverage is greatly diminished. Yep. We'll probably still have some capacity. I hope they're leaving some capacity behind the way that we were thinking about doing that, but their leverage to convince the Taliban to do anything is diminished greatly. Our leverage with the Taliban was always really straightforward. If you don't do what we want, we're going to impose real costs. We did that multiple times. We had established a model, an understanding, a set of deterrence mechanisms that made clear to the Taliban that you weren't going to attack Americans. We executed that. When our forces are gone, when our military's capabilities are gone, the ability to influence the Taliban's decisions, if they choose to hold Americans for whatever reason, to convince this administration to recognize them or whatever it may be, our leverage will be almost zero.
Sure, the leverage is the big stick, the figurative big stick.
Always.
And now that's gone. Mr. Secretary, are you disappointed with the Pentagon? Because we have heard that apparently all the top generals, everybody at the Pentagon, completely on board with the Joe Biden plan.
Well, Steve, I'd be surprised if that's the case. When this gets unpacked, I'd be surprised. I watched the senior military leaders on the ground there. They were always demanding that we made this a conditions-based departure. President Trump did that. He honored that commitment. I'd be surprised if they changed from administration to administration.
So do you think that's just White House
and decided this was a good idea. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you think that's just White House spin? They're putting out word to friendlies in the mainstream media?
Yeah, Steve, I suspect that's the case. I know a lot of these colonels, the majors, the folks who are actually tasked with executing this, some of the junior folks, they all knew that you had to make sure to do this sequenced right and in an orderly way. This is what they implored us to do. It was the recommendation they gave to President Trump, and in every step along the way, we honored that. Right.
So a couple of things. The Taliban have brutally killed the interior minister. They dragged him through the streets, the former one now, and then they shot him dead. The LGBT Afghans fear they'll be killed because of their past track record and their views on gays in that country. They like to throw them off roofs. And they just killed a popular folk singer just days after they said no more music. Evidently, he played music. So that's the life we're leaving. When they talk about leverage, he's saying that recognition and dollars, access to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and others, is that leverage? Should that be used? So essentially, should we be paying ransom to get Americans out?
Brian, this is crazy. This is crazy talk. This is craziness on stilts, right? This is built on an understanding that somehow these folks are going to behave in a way that's consistent with the other nations that we recognize. There is no evidence of this, and so I've been surprised to hear them talk about the Taliban caring about international recognition. I never saw that. They cared about the singular thing, accreting power to themselves. I hope this administration is not prepared to pay them the same way they paid the Iranians before. I hope that because it didn't work. Iran continues to be the host, the headquarters for the Taliban, for Al-Qaeda, right? The senior Al-Qaeda leaders in the world today are inside of Iran. We gave them billions of dollars in pallets of cash. This idea that we're going to use American money to bribe the Taliban to behave is something that's absolutely ludicrous, Brian.
And during our conversation with you, our producers were calling the Pentagon, and the Pentagon has said that the Reuters report is not true, and there will be more flights today. So that's great news. Nikki Haley wants Joe Biden to resign. Do you think he'll do that?
I'm focused on making sure we get the Americans out. No, I suspect President Biden is not going to do that. What I hope the Biden administration has learned that you have to focus on security. You have to get this right. And it is American power, not climate change discussions, not discussions about diversity and inclusion, that it is American power and leadership that delivers good outcomes for the American people. I think we've seen when you don't do that, when you demonstrate weakness, you see precisely what we saw yesterday at Dover. It saddens me greatly. I hope that's the lesson that is taken away from this.
Mr. Secretary, the sense with this administration reportedly is this is a news cycle away. The American people aren't interested in foreign affairs. By 2022, everyone will forget this. What do you think?
I can't imagine people forgetting this. We're now 2 decades, Brian, 2 decades on from 9/11, and no American has forgotten what happened that day, the anger, the outrage of someone attacking Americans in our homeland. I'm confident that the American people will remember this and that they'll demand each of their leaders account for what they did and present them a solution for how we're going to make sure something like this never happens again.
All right, Mr. Pompeo, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all.
Thank